Well, today is Monday, December 3rd, 2018, and I'm interviewing Thomas J. Saadi, Commissioner of the Department of Veterans Affairs here in Connecticut at Rocky Hill Veterans Home in Rocky Hill, Connecticut. The interviewee is Congresswoman Elizabeth H. Esty, working with Central Connecticut State University. Also present is Sherry Vogt, my aide. Sherry will be operating the camera. I'll be asking the questions, and my good friend Tom Saadi will be telling us his story. All right, let's sort of set the stage on your specifics. Can you tell us your full name and city and the state in which you currently live?
Full name is Thomas John Saadi. I reside in Danbury, Connecticut.
And in which war or during which time period did you serve?
I actually serve currently. I've been a member of the United States Army Reserve Judge Advocate General Corps since being sworn in as a direct commissionee in November 2005. So I'm now going into my 14th year of service in the U.S. Army Reserves.
And, well, you answered the question, what branch of service, and your highest rank, because that's an interesting question given your current government service position.
So my current rank in the military is a major, and so it's the highest rank I've achieved to date. I do hope to continue to serve in the reserve for several more years, and I may achieve, if I'm honored by that, a higher rank. My rank on the civilian side is Commissioner of the Department of Veterans Affairs. And it is an interesting dynamic because my civilian rank is higher than my military rank. I work with many general officers in the military department here in Connecticut, 1 and 2 stars, and we are equal as public servants in the state, but our military ranks, they very much outrank me.
And your general location of service in the JAG Corps, where were you?
I went to my officer basic in Virginia at Fort Lee, and then served in the 4th Legal Operations Detachment, which was first located in Bronx, New York, Reserve Unit, and then over in Fort Totten in Long Island. During that time, I had 4 overseas duty training missions in Europe and Germany and Italy. Those were temporary services in support of, at that time, it was a global war on terrorism and contingency operations. And in September 2014, I transferred to the 411th Civil Affairs Battalion, which is in the Danbury Reserve Center, the Veterans Memorial Armed Forces Reserve Center. And I've been with that unit ever since as their judge advocate for the battalion.
Well, I want to take us back a lot earlier,
okay.
Because you and I have known each other for a while now.
Yes.
And one of the reasons I was really eager to get you to tell your story, to be part of this oral history project of Americans who have served over the years, served this country, is your relationship to the armed services as a Lebanese American boy with service members on your mom's side of the family going way back, and dad's, but also having seen the importance of the U.S. peacekeeping mission in Beirut, in Lebanon, where you all had family living and as you were growing up. You told that story powerfully at a service recently recognizing those who lost their lives as part of that peacekeeping mission, people from Connecticut and the region who served and who lost. And it was such a powerful story. And I've done a lot of these interviews. I've never heard someone tell a story from the perspective of those who have received the service of Americans in the armed forces, and particularly that role of peacekeeping, which we rarely talk about, but is so critical. And given my role in Congress and having recently been in Africa, where we do have peacekeeping forces, and much of our discussion with AFRICOM was the importance of those peacekeeping missions, I thought it would be really valuable for people to hear about that part of your life and how that may, and I want to ask you more questions about how that may have inspired you to end up deciding to serve and to choose what you did in terms of Judge Advocate General. So dial it back, tell us a little bit about your childhood, and if you can, maybe flesh out sort of how it is you came to where you are today.
Well, my father immigrated from Lebanon to the United States in 1964. He did not know a word of English and basically came here with a suitcase and to educate himself and live that American dream. But we always had very strong ties with his very large family in Lebanon. He was one of 12.
Oh,
So
wow.
11 siblings living in Lebanon. My mother is of Lebanese and Italian descent. She was born here. Her great-grandparents immigrated from Italy and Lebanon. So we had a very strong connection with our heritage growing up, myself and my sisters. And then there was a sort of a twist or a new dynamic. When I was 8 years old, my father got a job in Saudi Arabia, working for an oil company there. And so a few months after he started working there, we all traveled, my mother, my sisters and I, and we lived in Saudi Arabia on and off for a little over 5 years. So in the 70s and the early 80s, we had opportunities to travel to Lebanon quite often to visit family. And we did that before the Civil War started and even during the Civil War. And as a young child, spending long periods of time, my summers in Lebanon, I had no idea really what was happening or how dangerous it actually was at the time. But we had wonderful connections with our family over there, and my parents ensured that we were safe. But one of those trips was particularly impactful. I was about 12 or 13 years old, and there had been some significant heavy fighting in Lebanon. There had been fighting between militias and the Israelis who had invaded Lebanon to push the PLO out. And it was it was a dangerous time. We traveled, though, to Lebanon. There was a lull in the fighting, and part of that lull was based on the presence of American peacekeepers, U.S. Marines, who hundreds were based at the airport as well as at the Marine barracks and around Beirut. And this was the second time. My father, as a teenager, saw the Marines in 1958 when they went to Lebanon to help stabilize the situation, and they did so. And for 2 decades thereafter, Lebanon was peaceful. But so when I went, I didn't realize how important it was at the time, but I knew something was different, because when we got off the plane at Beirut International Airport, I saw for the first time the American flag flying where the Marines were stationed by the airport, and my mother had pointed that out to us, that U.S. Marines were now here and that we'd be safe. And there was a sense that now things would get better. And the Lebanese people, my relatives and others who served in the Lebanese army at the time, and those who were in civilian employment, all had a feeling that now there would be a better chance for peace and stability. And they really looked at the Marines, as did I. I mean, even talking about it, I get a chill or a shiver, and I, it is emotional, because I didn't know at the time, but learned years later that I had a cousin, a distant cousin on my mother's side, Lebanese American, who was serving with the Marines in Beirut at that time. The day of the bombing, he happened to not be at the barracks. Luckily for him, but sadly he lost friends and comrades in the bombing. I wasn't there when there was a terrorist bombing of the barracks. I was there before it happened. I saw Marines, got a chance to chat with them somewhere at the airport, and again, it was just something where my family, so as a 12-year-old Lebanese American who was now traveling there to visit family, there was U.S. Marines protecting me and giving my father's homeland a chance for peace. Sadly, we know that it didn't go the way that was planned, unfortunately, but it doesn't take away the success. And I told those Marines that I saw at the ceremony, Congresswoman Essie, that both you and I were at, that they should not feel that their service there didn't have an impact, because it did. Because it did allow some level of stability, and some of that stability supported entities and organizations that then helped to build towards peace in Lebanon. So they did have a positive impact. And then, again, ironically, in 2005, I think it was, when the Hezbollah kidnapped 2 Israeli soldiers, and there was the Hezbollah-Israel war that then brought violence and fighting into Lebanon again. It was U.S. Marines that helped evacuate some of my cousins who were visiting other relatives there. So 3 times, not in my life, but 3 times in my father's life and twice in my life, it was members of the U.S. Armed Forces, in particular U.S. Marines, backed by naval personnel, who came to aid Lebanon and Lebanese Americans, and I will never forget that.
Well, thank you for sharing that, because I think sometimes, we think about sort of the big wars or the Marines coming in to save the day, but that harder work in a lot of ways of trying to provide stability and shelter and reassurance, imperfect as it is, right, in the imperfect world and in the era of terror that we are living in now, I mean, in which the enemies are disappear and pop up elsewhere, and I think it's a generational battle we're in that does not fight by conventional means. It's really important to remind people of the role of that stability and
Absolutely.
Reassurance. And you could feel it. I mean, you weren't old enough to articulate it or even to know what was going on really, but enough you felt that was...
There was something different, absolutely.
There was something different, and seeing that flag and how your relatives felt about that and that sense of safety and space. Because I'll tell you, I heard that when I was in Africa last month. I heard those same comments about the importance of U.S. forces in peacekeeping missions and the desire of other countries to be trained by U.S. to do that peacekeeping mission because they see the goodness of what when they see the American flag and they think about what that means, the freedom and the respect and the dignity that carries with it. And
there's a direct connection between my experiences in the 80s in Lebanon with the Marines and seeing what they did and the peacekeeping mission they were there, that was their mission. Peace was their mission. And the unit that I currently serve with, the 411th Civil Affairs Battalion, and Civil Affairs is tasked with that mission of helping to rebuild nations or to build capacity within nations to have rule of law, stability, help with the building of schools, standing up a judicial system. And this is happening. There are members of my unit that recently served in and soon will be serving in Africa. And you bring up something that's very important. People don't realize how many peace and stability operations we have around the world. These are not combat roles.
right.
They are roles to help and to rebuild where combat may have occurred and even where it didn't, to help stand up those essential functions of government to help the people that are there. And they are grateful. When they see that uniform, they see that flag, and they know that hopefully that peace and stability now will be able to be spread in their nation or in their region in troubled areas. And going back to my initial service, I joined much later in life. I was 35 years old when I commissioned in.
So what inspired you at that point? I mean, you were already a lawyer by then, right? You'd gone to
Yeah.
law school, and so what changed, or what was that call to service that made you think, I want to do this now?
On my mother's side of the family, we have members that have served in the military going back to World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and all through, including in Beirut. And my father, obviously on his side of the family, since he lived in Lebanon, didn't have that military tradition here, but he also served compulsory service. He served in the Lebanese army for reserve training before he immigrated to the United States. So there's a tradition of military service on both sides of the family. I was inspired by that initially and almost enlisted out of high school, but then in talking with the family, decided I was going to go to college. The college where I went didn't have an ROTC program, so it sort of faded, but I always felt a connection with the military. I loved history and studying it in high school and college, but as time went on, I began to work, and I thought that I was just either too old to go into the military, or that I wouldn't be able to do that and keep my civilian job and practice law as I was doing with the Office of the Attorney General. And then my brother-in-law at the time, his father was in the Air Guard. He told me about direct commissioning. This was after September 11th, and I wanted to do something more. So I
So
went through-
what year was this that you?
When I started the process in about 2002, 2003.
So it was really pretty closely after 9/11.
Yes,
then,
I was
right?
trying to figure a way that I could serve and do
Mhm.
more, and I wasn't sure that I could go into the military. Got an age waiver because I was too old at the time. When I finally received permission to commission in and entered the Judge Advocate General Corps, which I could do directly as a lawyer, would go in as a first lieutenant. And once you're sworn in, to go to your training or you're called up, Connecticut, like the federal government, but Connecticut has great protections for those who are in the military, in the reserve and guard, when they get called up
Mhm.
in order to keep their job. So I was able to continue to practice as an assistant attorney general and serve my state, but also enter the Army Reserve, and that was just over 13 years ago. And I've truly enjoyed the service. Just as any job, there are days when you can become frustrated, but I'm not, I'm an older member of the military.
So how did that go? So what did you have to do for physical training and everything? This is important. We know there are challenges right now for young people, frankly, just because Americans eat too much and don't exercise enough. So we hear readiness issues about whether we have enough people physically fit. I would think that would be challenging a 35-year-old fit guy, but still those metrics are set.
You're absolutely
for
right.
18-year-olds, not for 35-year-olds.
They give a little consideration for your age, but most of the training you have to achieve what you need to do in order to be a soldier. So you have your warrior skills and you have your professional skills. As a judge advocate, I still have to be proficient with my weapon. I have to understand my warrior skills and tasks and how to do them. And so at basic, officer basic, I will say it wasn't as difficult as going through enlisted basic training. And it has, though, been stepped up since I was in, but when I went in, there were challenges, and so I had to get myself ready. And while it wasn't a young enlisted group, many of them were in their 20s, I was probably about 10 years older than most. And now I'm about twice the age of many members of my battalion and need to keep up with them. But it's something that I feel has made me a healthier person physically and mentally to be in the military, to keep up with that training. And it's a holistic approach. And the military is very much about that, not just, getting these certain tasks down and these, fire your weapon and know how to do that proficiently in your warrior skills, but also the health of the individual and also the family. And I have to say that the reserves, and it's probably very similar in the National Guard as well, have done so much, particularly in the last decade and a half, to look at the individuals within the Reserve and National Guard components as not just one person, but as an extension of their family. And so bringing spouses into the fold and children and making that a part of the military from the standpoint of family readiness groups, family days, picnics, and reaching out. So that has been very helpful as well, because primarily, I'm a commissioner now, I was an attorney with the Attorney General's office, and you have a whole other life as a citizen soldier. So I have enjoyed, and I continue to enjoy my service, and I have to tell you that the inspiration from those Marines to the veterans that I met before I commissioned in, to veterans in my family, including a cousin who served in 1st Air Cav 68, 69 in Vietnam, they have led the way for me, I think, and for others, and donning the uniform and living up to what they achieved. That greatest generation of World War II, those that served in Korea and Vietnam, and in all the conflicts before and in between. I often say that the veterans I speak to and the soldiers I serve with are, part of a unique military tradition and history, because unlike the military traditions and histories of other countries, and other countries have great deep traditions and histories, ours is not one of conquest for the sake of conquest, but it's been one of fighting for freedom. Just like the mission of those Marines in Beirut in 82 and 83, and other missions across the globe. These are missions to achieve freedom, to protect the freedom of Americans, and to achieve freedom for others. From World War I and World War II, and freeing Europe and the Pacific and Asia and Africa from tyranny, to fighting communist aggression in Korea and Vietnam, to all the operations, again, in between and since then, Iraq and Afghanistan, and now in Africa and across the globe in stability operations. It's a unique tradition and history of fighting for freedom. And, you know, I have such respect for those who have done so much more than I have done or ever will do. But if I can do my small share and carry on that tradition, that's something that I can pass along to the next generation, I'm happy with that. And I hope that I can help be part of the overall mission of our military, as well as sitting at this desk and in this chair as a Commissioner of Veterans Affairs, taking what I learned, applying that to my service as Commissioner so that I can better serve veterans and service members in this chair and through this agency.
Now, you went through the reserves, and you went at an older point. Were your kids born yet?
When I first commissioned in, they were not.
They were not. All right, so that their whole lives you've been coming in and out. Now, how did that, were there times that you were away in service, for example, during the holidays when your kids were growing up?
You know, I have been lucky not to have been away as much as so many others in my unit, and that I've served with have been, whether they've been away for months or years, for those holidays, missing birthdays and soccer games, and their children growing up without them for long periods of time. In my service thus far, I've been lucky that I have not missed significant holidays. I have been away on training and on temporary overseas duty in Europe during some birthdays and some other events, but I've been lucky that way. That being said, what people must remember is that for most, that is not the case.
Right.
That they miss those significant periods, those significant life events. And also, what I hope people remember is that, you know, those who are serving, particularly in the Reserve and Guard, these days with what we call, you know, all or an operational force, that you have many service members with children.
Right.
People who are married, people who are children. These are moms and dads, husbands, wives, brothers, sisters, from every, you know, I would say every part of life, from every ethnic group and racial background, from every religion. So our military, I think, is such a reflection of society, and people shouldn't forget that. It's not just the young guy, single, who's out there donning the uniform. Men and women, married, unmarried, children, with children, without children. So I think that's something that, as the Commissioner of Veterans Affairs, I always try to remind people of. That don't assume that someone is or is not in the military simply because of what they look like, or because they're a man, because the largest growing demographic in the military today are women in the military. And I tell you, that's something that I have tried to educate others on, not to assume that because your client, your constituent, or someone in a particular program with the state is a woman, that they didn't serve. Ask them if they served. And if they're a veteran, then let's connect them with the programs and services that they earned. Because I think that oftentimes it's women in the military who, once they come back, aren't the ones asking for those services. They're very busy raising children, being that mom, also working a job. So it's something that I really, learned that the military is, I think, the most diverse and dynamic organization, the U.S. military, in the entire world.
How have you seen that change over the time since, say, 2002, 2003, so we're talking 15 years or so that you've been in, 14 years. What have you seen change in terms of who's serving in the military? Can you talk a little bit about those attitudes? I mean, certainly it's something you and I have talked about, concerns about stress from being deployed over and over again. It's very hard to be on assignment for a long period of time, but there are different kinds of stress, as you say, if you're a parent, or you're married, or you have a civilian job you left to connect, to be in country, being a warrior, then you're back being a civilian, then you're back being a warrior. Then those are unique challenges that we have not seen in other generations. I think that's unique to this generation.
You're absolutely right.
Have you seen that? How have you seen that manifest itself, and what are your thoughts around
that? At its height, just over 40% of our forces in Iraq and Afghanistan were Guard and Reserve. So what that means is exactly as you said, individuals whose primary jobs are civilian, who very often have spouses and family obligations and children, who are mobilized for long periods of time and multiple times. This causes great stress on their employment situation, on family dynamic, and when they come off deployment, they don't stay on an active duty base or fort or naval station as if, if they were an active duty soldier or a military member coming off deployment. They go home.
Right. They're
And
in a neighborhood.
They're in a neighborhood. They're back with civilians, which people say, well, it's great, you're back, but you don't have those support services, or didn't
Right.
in the beginning of this generation-long conflict in the civilian side. One of the biggest changes is the greater spectrum of services that are available for Guard and Reserve and active duty when they come off active duty and are now back in civilian life. But there is also greater attention by the U.S. military, the Department of Defense, the federal VA, and the State Department of Veterans Affairs to that dynamic, that these multiple tours are wearing on an individual and on their families. They're wearing on employers at times. And that we need to do more and continue to address changing needs of veterans. We have younger veterans who are coming home who have a different way of connecting with services. They're not going and filling out pieces of paper and standing in line. They want to do this online.
Right.
And using mobile apps, which the DVA now has, in order to connect them. Reaching out, not just through veteran service organizations, which are amazing and they do amazing things, but many of our new veterans, unfortunately, aren't joining them. So we have to go out into the community and connect with them, connect with their employers, connect with them when they're redeploying back home. There are more women, as we just discussed, in the military. And there is a new dynamic or challenge there because they are more likely to be the primary care provider for children. So we have to have proper family care plans in place. You also have older veterans now because of the reliance on Guard and Reserve, individuals, I guess I'm older, I'm almost 50 now and I'm still in, so who are still on duty at a later age before their mandatory military retirement. I don't think we had that in previous generations, so many individuals who are older, as I am, because we have a greater reliance on Guard and Reserve. So all of those things, but also our World War II, Korea, and Vietnam vets, they have changing needs. And we're sadly losing our World War II vets at a very rapid pace. And just as we're doing this interview, we just lost our 41st President, George Herbert Walker Bush, one of the members of that greatest generation, which reminds us that our youngest World War II veterans are in their advanced 80s, and most of them are in their 90s. But they are still, many are still with us, so we have to adjust to their changing needs. The Korea and Vietnam veterans who may have illnesses or ailments that are only manifesting themselves now, decades after they left service. So simply because they have been veterans for many years doesn't mean their needs aren't changing as well. So we adjust to the changing needs of our veterans and adjust to the changing needs and new dynamics of those who are coming home today. So I wear that hat in the military as a judge advocate with the 411th, but also as Commissioner of Veterans Affairs.
Can I take you back to when, you were inspired at 35 after 9/11, given your family's history and your skills and training as a lawyer, as an assistant attorney general? You had this concept, you answered a call, a yearning that you felt for some time. Can you take us back to what it was like at that time? How did it feel? You were, as you say, significantly older, probably twice the age of some of the people, well, not so much for the JAG Corps, but significantly older. What struck you? What was what you expected, and what were the things that were different? Were the challenges the ones you thought you'd have, or did it turn out to be other things were challenging? Did you love it immediately and never looked back, or have other things like, am I doing the right thing? What did I sign up for? Can you take us back? I mean, I know where you are now, and you embrace this mission with passion and knowledge and commitment, but take us back to your 15 years, 14 years. What happened? You made this decision, you have to train. Walk me through that a little bit, what that was like.
I felt as an attorney, as an assistant attorney general, and that I could take those skills and help as a judge advocate. And whether it's helping soldiers and armed force members from a legal perspective with issues when they're back home, or in operational law, you advise commanders on the rule of law and the rules of engagement. But I've often heard from other veterans that sometimes those first couple of days, like, did I do the right thing? Because I was older, and I'm older, I was unsure if I'd be able to keep up.
Okay, so
And
you were like, am I gonna make the cut?
Am I gonna
Right,
make
am I
this
gonna make
cut?
it?
And there were people who were older a few who were older than me, but they were prior service.
Mhm.
They were physically fit, they had served, they had already trained, so they knew what to expect. I just didn't know what to expect. I remember that first night after arriving in Fort Lee, when they were calling out and forming us into a company, and then into platoons, and then into squads. It was dark, it was cold, it was January, we're all lining up and they're shouting out the names and to get into formation, and I'm thinking to myself, wow, did I do the right thing here? Am I gonna be able to do this? But it was the soldiers to my right and left, quite literally, one who was prior service, one who was not, but who was ROTC, and went into law school and came out, who helped me. And quite literally, putting together my Alice pack, my rucksack, and how to put the straps together, I didn't know. And I'm like, I look like a fool. I have legal experience, I can help them, but I can't put my backpack together properly. And they helped me. The young ones who had more experience than that, I learned from them. And I'll tell you one thing, once I came out of Officer Basic, OBC, and then was assigned to my reserve unit, I looked to those who are now officers, who were judge advocates, who had prior military service, who were enlisted or senior NCOs, and asked them, how do I do these things? I want to learn from you. And they taught me. I learned from them, how to be a better soldier, how to serve them. And the other thing I'd learned, and the challenge was, I haven't been in combat theater.
Right.
So I don't know that experience as a member of the military. I actually have been in dangerous situations as a civilian in Lebanon, and even through my teenage years when the Civil War was going on, I was in areas where just a few blocks over, gunfire was going on. There was several cities over. One time we were having lunch and I heard a car bomb go off. I didn't know what it was until later in the day. So I was in those situations as a civilian, but not as a military. But one thing I was taught is I need to know as much and to understand as much as I can as to what those individuals go through who are in combat situations, so that I can better serve them. And so training as much as possible and going through scenarios, what they call, or running lanes, and being in those scenarios that experienced combat soldiers teach us or taught us as judge advocates, so that we can at least get a sense of understanding. So heaven forbid you have a soldier who's now being prosecuted for allegedly improperly shooting somebody or killing someone or whatever it might be. But you have to understand what they go through. I haven't had to do that personally, but to understand it so I can either defend them or, if necessary, prosecute if we can see that this was incorrect, this was improper, this did violate the rules of engagement. So they're having challenges in areas that I didn't think there would be, as you said, where the complexity of legal issues now, which is very different than 20 or 30 years ago in the military. The instant news cycle, the social media aspect, teaching soldiers that be careful what you post. I'm not talking about posting photos or videos of doing something improper, posting information regarding where you're going. That's right. Where you are.
Right, or even just having photo tagging, geotagging where you are.
Absolutely. People don't realize the metadata that is buried and embedded in photographs and videos. So there might be no signs around you of where you are.
But someone can geolocate by
absolutely. So being careful with that. Teaching military personnel to avoid scams, getting ripped off because people know when they come back from service, maybe they have extra cash, maybe they're looking to buy something, they're looking, or the issues of granting powers of attorney to people. I unfortunately had soldiers who had their bank accounts wiped out and cleaned out by individuals who they thought they could trust and gave them powers of attorney. So a lot of that educating so that I can help them clear their minds, be stable legally, be stable at home, and in order to serve overseas with a clear mind and know that they have stability at home in their civilian military life, their legal issues are all taken care of, and that they've been trained and received all the briefings that they need so that they can go do their mission with clarity and with focus, and so they can come home safely.
I'll bet that last part though, I mean, that's almost like being a counselor at law. You know, if you think about
Absolutely.
it traditionally, or being like an uncle, a father and uncle to young men and women who you can take that burden off because for them, as you say, to be the warrior they need to be while they're there,
Yes.
their life is still, things at home
Yeah, absolutely.
are gnawing at them, and certainly from the veterans I've talked to, that is often the most distracting, concerning thing, because they're concerned about what's happening at home, concerned they can't be there. Was that something you anticipated? It sounds to me like you were really thinking about the outward facing this, I think most of us would, the war on terror is going on, you have legal skills, can you harness those legal skills for the good of the world and for the rule of law and all these other things, but this is a very different kind of role. How have you found that to be? I mean, that's in part more like being a counselor.
You absolutely, Congresswoman, hit the nail on the head. It's as much sort of counseling and guidance and mentorship as it is legal. And because of the current position I'm in as Commissioner of Veterans Affairs, having worked here as Chief of Staff prior to that, working in the Attorney General's office, the work I've done with veterans before I joined the Reserve or commissioned in, has helped me significantly because there are many things that I've been able to assist military personnel with, which aren't strictly legal,
Right.
because of the experiences that I have, you know, from those other aspects of my life. And those, I think, have helped soldiers and other military personnel, and you know, taking my personal experiences and trying to impart something to them. And again, going back to that point of helping them to be stable,
Right.
helping them with employment issues, helping them with legal issues, assisting them with family issues if necessary, referring them to the right points of contact, so that, as you said, they can have a clear mind and focus on their mission, whether it's a peace and stability operation overseas, combat mission, or simply going and training. Because in all those things, there are very positive things, but there are also dangers. We want them focused and clear-minded so they can go and accomplish the mission again, return home safely and having accomplished that mission.
What would you say to your kids about if they were interested in joining the military? Would you want them to? What would you say? I know they're too young for that now, but they probably ask you questions about what you do.
They do, and you know,
What are those conversations like?
well, they ask me, Daddy, you know, when we were little, were you gone for a long time? Or, you know, where do you have to go for your training this time? Have you traveled to these places? And I try to connect them as much as possible with my military service. We have family days at our unit. When there are parades or there's events that they can go to, I bring them and introduce them to members of my current unit and veterans that across the state. And absolutely, I'd be very proud for them to serve in the United States military. And I have twins. One's a boy, one's a girl. And the one thing I always make sure is that when I meet a female veteran or a female member of the armed forces currently serving, and my daughter's with me, I introduce her and I say, see, there are women in the military, there are women in the Army too. Don't let anybody say you can't achieve whatever you want, sweetheart. And she was amazed at first. I introduced her to a member of my staff, Emily Hine, who's currently a captain in the National Guard. And my daughter was just an offer. She's a captain? I didn't know girls could be in the Army or be officers. And you know, it was an 8-year-old saying this, an 8 or 9-year-old saying it. And so, you know, it's important for them to know about my service, but I think more importantly, because again, my service is a very small part of what's happening now in the military, and I have, you know, it's nothing compared to what the veterans that I meet have done and what they've gone through. It's nothing compared to what fellow soldiers in my unit go through. So I want my children to understand it. Granted, you know, you shield them from some things. They, you know, don't need to be told everything at, you know, this tender age of 10, but to understand that service is honorable, and that those who serve, you know, honor our country by wearing the uniform and honor our flag by serving under that flag.
Have you lost friends in the military?
I have been lucky. I have not had anyone that I personally knew who has either lost in combat operations or to suicide. That being said, that's another major issue, is the suicide issue.
Absolutely.
There have been members of my unit,
Mhm.
the 411th, who were in it before I joined it, and my former unit, my judge advocate unit, who did fall in service to the country, and others who took their own lives. I've known their friends who told me about it, and reached out to families where that has happened. And that's another thing, is part of this job, as well as in my position as a judge advocate, is ensuring that we reach out to those who are in crisis and to connect them with those services. Because right now, the U.S. military is losing, there's more veterans who are dying because of suicide, who are, and those in military service who either die in motor vehicle accidents, who are losing their lives maybe because of severe substance abuse or due to suicide. Many of those things are connected to TBI,
Mhm.
PTSD,
Mhm.
family crisis, where we need to intervene in that and to prevent that from happening. We should not be losing that many veterans or service members
Mhm.
to those types of situations, whether they're self-inflicted or through abuse of drugs because of something else they're dealing with.
Mhm.
We have to intervene, and that is another of those changing needs of veterans that we need to focus on.
Now, that's something I know you and I have both been wrestling with a lot, is military suicide, whether it's currently serving or veterans. What do you think, as we sit here in late 2018, what is it that the concerned public should know? Like, what can people do? What can people do? Because that's something I get asked. What do you think, if people know folks in the military or veterans, that they can do to try to reach out and provide connection or lifeline?
If they are not in crisis, but you've never asked, just ask them about their military service. Not, necessarily what combat operation were you in, or were you ever wounded, but just say, oh, I heard you were in the military, what branch? Or I had an uncle who was in the Army, were you in the Army? Just to start a dialogue or connection, thank them for their service. I often say that while we focus on the crisis issues, the suicides, the visible and invisible wounds of war that our veterans struggle with, let's never assume that our veterans or the members of our armed forces are broken.
Right.
Reaching out and asking them, or reaching out to help them, or referring them to supportive services is not an acknowledgement that they're broken. It's an acknowledgement that they need some assistance because of what they went through, what they endured.
Mm-hmm.
And they are human beings just like anybody else, with the same fallibilities at times and the emotions, but they have gone through, many of them, something far more intense than what most people in civil society have gone through. So reach out, thank them for their service. If they want to talk about it, talk to them. If they don't, you leave it at that. But if you are an employer, or you have a friend who's in the military or a veteran, or a colleague at work, and you notice something, don't be hesitant to reach out, maybe to refer them, or to contact somebody who can refer them to supportive services. Whether it's federal programs and services, state-based programs and services, community-based. There are vet centers and many programs where individuals can go with some level of anonymity. They don't have to report it to their employer, but get those support services. Because very often, just as in civilian life and in military life, we know if you intervene early enough, you can prevent that suicide, you can prevent the falling apart of a family, you can prevent that detachment that individuals may have from just everyday life, and help them reintegrate. So, but because of those things, sometimes people or employers may think, well, they're a broken person, I don't want to employ them, I don't want to reach out to them. No, they served, they're not broken, they just may need a little bit of support.
But they also have enormous skills.
Absolutely. Transferring those skill sets, the skills that they learned, the organizational skills, the job skills, whether they drove a truck, commanded 1,000 troops, flew a drone, programmed computers and technology that far exceeds anything that I ever could imagine working on. There's so many different skill sets and job skills that can be transferred to civilian work. And they inherently are a group of people who know how to organize and who know how to work within an organization.
Is there something, given that you ended up going in later, and you knew you had skills as a lawyer, as a successful, accomplished lawyer working for the Attorney General's office, was there something that surprised you that turned out to be life experience or training or exposure that you had that turned out to be quite valuable, that you would never have thought? Because sometimes people say, like, I had no idea, but actually something in my past or something in my family I never thought about as being connected, but turned out to actually, you know, sometimes it can save someone's life, sometimes it can turn out to just be very important because you don't really know what the job's going to be, right? You have the idea, and so that's another way of getting at your idea of what you thought you would be doing and what it turned out you actually have ended up doing, and the difference between those two when other things turned out to be highly important. Can you think of any examples of that?
Just my ethnic background.
Okay.
You know, my father having immigrated from Lebanon and myself having lived in Saudi Arabia for 5 years. I never thought that as a as a child and a teenager would translate into what it ended up translating into in my military service. It has nothing to do with being a judge advocate, but I was able to bring what I knew about the Middle East into my military service and help to train personnel before they deployed on Middle Eastern cultures, the different religions, and one thing, teaching people that it wasn't a monolith in the Middle East, that there were many different cultures and religions that were practiced. And uniquely myself, although I'm Middle Eastern, Arab American descent, a Lebanese American, I'm Christian.
Right.
And many people in the military found this surprising. When they heard of my background, they immediately assumed that I was Muslim. But I grew up with many Muslims in Saudi Arabia, so I was able to bring those in and help to train. And not just train, but even on an individual basis, talk with some soldiers who were deploying, talk about what they would encounter and help to teach them one-to-one. But also my civilian legal skills, as well as serving on my city council and understanding local government, has served well in helping to organize within the military setting and to assist, particularly in civil affairs, structural organization. Our job in civil affairs is helping to build capacity in civil society. And so those skill sets that I learned in local government and as an attorney have helped me very much in my job as a judge advocate within civil affairs and throughout my military career.
Well, that was a piece you have so many accomplishments that we hadn't even really talked about your time serving in local elected office. Yeah. Because in addition to, you just don't know how to say no, do you?
My wife and kids say, you're going to another meeting.
I'm going to another meeting, Dad. So talk about like what inspired you to do that? Was that again family things, or was that a sense of I know, put it this way, I know a lot of lawyers who do gardening because they deal with paper all the time and nothing's concrete, and whereas they can actually get their hands dirty and you plant something, if you take care of it, it's probably going to grow and you may get to eat it. Did you have a sense on doing local work? Was that you wanted to be able to implement and see and touch and feel what happened? Was that a call to give back to your community? Was that considering higher elected office for yourself? That's a dangerous question for one politician to ask another. But what is it that, when did you first get involved in doing local elected office? Because it is a partisan, sadly here in Connecticut, to my mind sadly, we are party affiliated when we run for everything, including the library board in my town. But what was it that inspired you to do that? When did you get started, and how does that fit in the rest with your military service and your other service?
I remember.
And where do you find the time?
Lots of coffee.
Lots of coffee. I'm a big believer in that too.
I remember the day very distinctly. I was in a history class. I think I was a junior at Western Connecticut State University. And there was a student sitting behind me. He's a couple of years older. There was a lot of non-traditional students at Western Connecticut State University at the time. And he was on the city council in Danbury. And we were just talking about local government a little bit, and he said, "Hey, I'm going out campaigning. I'm running for re-election. I'm going out campaigning this weekend. You want to join me?" I have no idea what to do. He goes, "Oh, we're door knocking. We're canvassing door to door. We're going to be going with the mayor and some other council people."
What year was this?
This was, I believe, in 1992.
Wow.
92. It was 1992? Actually, no, it was 91. It was a municipal
Right,
election.
municipal, it had to have
It was
been an odd year.
1991.
Uh-huh.
And so I went door to door. And I met mayor and the town clerk and these city council people, and I was in awe. I said, this is, first of all, I was in awe that I'm with these elected officials who are the ones that decide how the town is run and who gets hired in the police department and who's the chief, the fire department chief. But then also, I was really surprised at really how organic it was.
Mhm.
And that it was literally door to door, meeting people face to face. And another thing I learned about it, it's a campaign, and you talk about military campaigns.
Yes.
Working in politics and in campaign there, and in local government has helped me in the military from the standpoint of how you structure things, organizing them, lines of effort, and having contingency plans. So you always have a plan B, a plan A, and a plan B,
Mhm.
but you have to have a plan.
Right.
You say that first, at the point of first, no plan survives first contact. Whether it's in the military, I think, or in politics. You go into a debate with all your notes and you know these are the questions, all of a sudden the debate goes off in a entirely different direction, but you need to be prepared. So that also has helped me in my military service, but I really enjoyed it and started to meet people. And then my mother's family, who had been in Denver for some time, I started to realize that, well, this person knew my grandmother, this person knew my grandfather, and I just really started that organic basis, stuffing envelopes, making phone calls at night, and then was asked to be on the town committee. I joined that. And then a few years later, after serving on the Environmental Impact Wetlands Commission and doing a few other volunteer things, I ran for the city council in 1999. And
So that
I
was
got
before,
elected.
so that predated, you were an assistant attorney general at that point, were you? Or you were in the AG's office?
I just graduated from law school
Uh-huh.
in 1999. It was a very busy year. I graduated from law school in 1999. I was working for the judicial branch as a research clerk, and then I ran for the city council and was lucky enough to get elected, and a few months after that was hired by the Attorney General, then Attorney General Blumenthal,
Uh-huh.
in 2000. So it was a very busy,
Wow.
about 8 or 9 months after I graduated from law school. But throughout that, I refer to it as cross-pollination.
Mhm.
The volunteering and the going door to door and campaigning with others helped me to understand issues before I then was in elected office.
Right.
And then, having gone through law school, I interned at the state legislature. I worked on staff, so I had that. I interned with the Attorney General's office and understood some of the dynamic of government, brought that with me. And then, once I was in local elected office, my training as an attorney and work at the Attorney General's office was helpful with constituent issues.
Mhm.
And then going into the military, the local government experience, the legal experience, the campaigning,
Right.
all helped me in helping people within the military as a judge advocate. And they've all seemed to cross-pollinate with each other. I never thought I would be sitting in this seat as Commissioner of Veterans Affairs. I'm here because of the United States Army Reserve. The reason being is that the former Commissioner Sean Conley and I served together on some temporary duty at Fort Dix, New Jersey.
Is that
I was a
right?
judge advocate working for him. I didn't know he was from Connecticut. We met, I worked for him, he was a lieutenant colonel at the time, and we were supporting a warrior sustainment training program, and they needed a legal office to be opened up for a month down at Fort Dix to support this training. I helped with that, worked for him there, and about a year later, he said, "I'm going to be appointed as Commissioner of Veterans Affairs, I'd like you to work for me." And I came over as his chief of staff, and then when he resigned from this position, he ran for governor. I was fortunate enough to become acting commissioner, and Governor Malloy nominate me to be commissioner. So in a way, all my different hats have sort of come together and they all cross-support each other. But I will underscore one thing. I could not be in this seat, could not continue my military service without the support of family and friends, my wife, my children, my extended family and friends, and I include in that veterans within my family, veterans outside. Continue to learn from them, and their support is essential. It's essential to my job as commissioner because of so much that veterans do for their brother and sister veterans. It's essential for me serving in the military and veterans coming and supporting our current military personnel, and it's essential to have that family support and for them to be part of service. And I always say families serve with their service members, whether it's while they're in uniform or when they come home and are veterans. They serve as well.
Well, you've used everything in your life to bring that to bear on what you do now. And that's quite evident, and we're lucky to have you doing what you do. Is there anything else you'd like to add about, as we think about this, and I want to remind anybody watching this again, think about the Library of Congress is the largest library in the world, but it's also the People's Library. It actually isn't the presidential library, it's the Library of the People of the United States. And so your story is going to be part of the permanent record of our nation's history, which is not just about the generals and the presidents, but is about the people who are doing what they do every day, the veterans who answered that call and served, as you did. And in that context, is there anything else that you'd like to add? We're here in 2018, and let's be very clear, it's a very tumultuous time. It's a tumultuous time for the whole world. Western democracies are in uproar. There was rioting in Paris over the weekend that hasn't been seen since 1968. Many people are comparing this to sort of that era. How do you think about what you're doing and what the role of the U.S. military is, or perhaps should or could be, right now with the interconnected world we have, the challenges that we see, the divisions within our country, and yet, as you say, we have an unprecedentedly diverse military that reflects more of this country. So just some thoughts on that, because it is such an extraordinary time we're in, and your own life has reflected that kind of diverse background that we now see with so many Americans.
I'm honored to be able to serve as Commissioner of Veterans Affairs, to be able to serve as an officer in the United States Army Reserve, again, to don a uniform that so many generations before have donned, and done so much more than I have. But I think about this, that the son of an immigrant who grew up with 11 brothers and sisters on a farm in a poor village in the mountains of Lebanon, that his son now can serve in this position and be an officer in the United States military. It's not a reflection on me, it's a reflection on this nation and what can be achieved in following that American dream, and how important it is that we embrace that diversity and know that there's opportunity here and that we continue to afford that opportunity. And on my mother's side, to be the great-grandson of Italian miners who worked in coal mines in Canada and upstate New York after immigrating from Italy, and Lebanese great-grandparents who fled oppression under Ottoman Turkey in World War I and a famine in Lebanon, to be able to have, as an individual and as a family, the success I've had is a reflection of the greatness of this nation and that cross-generational greatness that goes back to our founding to almost 250 years ago. With regard to U.S. military, I think it is an amazing instrument of both diplomacy and of warfare, and it can be used properly in both settings, and it has to be utilized properly in those settings. And I think doing that, the United States military, its dynamic approach to things, its diversity, is an amazing asset that this nation, in this generation and in future generations, should use, but should use it appropriately. And I think when done so, and given the support that it needs, can achieve amazing, amazing things. And it's those quiet victories that we discussed earlier, those stability and peacekeeping missions, those post-combat rebuilding and missions, rebuilding capacity, oftentimes those are overlooked, and our military is engaged in those each and every day. We have hundreds of thousands of personnel across the globe at any one time, on every continent, and in a multitude of nations. And they're doing great work. Security work, and securing our nation and others, stability, peacekeeping missions, building schools, digging wells, helping police to stand themselves up and to create a stable civil society in nations across the globe. It's amazing. I'm overwhelmed when I think about how much so many others have done in the United States military. I'm just proud to be able to be a small part of that.
Well, thank you. It's really an honor to be your colleague and your friend, and I want to thank you for your service, continuing ongoing service over the years, and for sharing your perspective and wealth of experience as part of this important record, as a part of this nation's history.
Thank you. There's one thing I wanted to say, and I hope it's okay. I think, and it's part of history, but there's something, you know, in the military.
Well,
challenge
okay,
point,
hang on, I
and
need to get mine as well. We're gonna do the challenge point exchange, which if my purse is here.
And for those who will watch this in a few years, or maybe generations, that this challenge coin has the symbol of the State Department of Veterans Affairs on one side, all the branches of the military, including the National Guard, on the other, because we are one force, one fight, presented for excellence to Congresswoman Elizabeth Esty. Thank you for all your support of our veterans and members of the military, for your support of myself and your friendship and all you've done. Whenever I've called, you've been there. You've been there for any veteran that I've ever referred over to you. And on your staff, Sherry Vogt, who herself is an Army veteran, has always been there. So I want to thank you for that.
Thank you. I am honored, and I believe you have one of these, but I want you to have this, my challenge coin, although not serving in the military, but the daughter of a Navy veteran and daughter-in-law of an Air Force veteran. My challenge coin has the Charter Oak, the symbol of the state of Connecticut, the 5th District, with a little bit of the symbol of the Sandy Hook Green, recognizing the tragic events of the shootings in Sandy Hook 6 years ago next week, actually, as we speak. And on the back, I too have the 5 branches of the military, reflecting that it is one force under one nation, and that we serve that cause of freedom and rule of law and dignity for all human beings. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you so much.
You.
Thank you.
And I think. All right, so Tom, I asked you to add this on.
Okay.
So show us about who in your family has served. You've got, grandfathers, great uncles, etc., who are here.
So this is my grandfather, my mother's father, Albert Taylor. His parents immigrated from Lebanon. They're the ones that fled in World War I. He passed away, though, when I was 9 years old. I didn't have a chance to really get to know him that well. But I knew that he had been part of something amazing. He served in the Pacific in World War II. And this is the acknowledgement of his passing from then President Jimmy Carter.
Do you know what he did in World War II? Do you know what?
He was a cook.
He was a cook?
He was a cook in World War II, and they didn't have contractors doing it. It was military personnel. He served in the Pacific. He was at Pearl Harbor after. He told me he saw a lot of the destruction, when he got there about 6 months later, and then served until through the next 3 years in the Pacific. He returned one time for a brief period of time, I think at 44, when he married my grandmother, then went back out again. And went back out again. Yeah. This is actually his brother, Oscar Taylor, my great uncle and my godfather. He passed away about 4 or 5 years ago. He served just after World War II. In the Army Air Corps. It wasn't the Air Force then.
Right, the Army Air Corps, of course.
He became a pilot later on in life, but there he was a mechanic, and the pilot had named one of the aircraft Miss Danbury, my uncle being from Danbury. And that
yes, exactly. So we see the Miss Danbury here. So this is all things Danbury.
Yes, and so this is the citation in memory of him from then President Obama. And then this is my wife's great uncle, Americo Ventura. I was very, even though he's not my blood uncle, but my
Right.
sort of uncle-in-law.
Right.
We were very close. He passed away just a year ago, and this is a citation in his memory from President Trump. And Americo Ventura, he then went on to a legal practice of 60 years.
Oh my goodness.
And, you know, so in one way or another, all these men touched my life, even though I didn't know my grandfather very much. Just his service inspires me, and there's other relatives within my family that have served. I had an uncle on my mother's side, a great uncle, who served in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam, and retired during Vietnam as a colonel. So there's been many throughout the generations in my family that have served, and you know, these men, you know, have obviously since passed, and I put them all up here because they were all very different individuals, did different things in their civilian life, but they were part of that brother and sisterhood, but for them, their brotherhood, all wearing the uniform and serving their nation. And it came back to civilian lives to continue to serve.
Serve in their community, and as I think one of the favorite things I like to tell school children, but actually adults find it pretty interesting, is on the Great Seal of the United States and the way the head of the eagle, what is the eagle facing? And you have the arrows for war, and you have the olive branch, particularly appropriate for you,
Yes.
with your family coming from Lebanon,
Right.
the olive branch of peace, and
Peace
how
and light, yes.
and how the eagle's head is turned towards peace most of the time, except when we're at war, and that they swap out the seal in the center of the rug in the Oval Office for the president to turn towards war when we are officially declared at war. And we notice all these men fought in war, but returned for peace,
Yes.
returned to establish a life of peace, which is what we in all countries, all people aspire to, is that life of peace and tranquility with their families. Well, thank you again so much.
Thank you so much. Awesome.